Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Two Way Tonight. I'm Mark Halperin, your roving correspondent. This evening, traveling. You might ask where I am. Well, I'm in a Starbucks, which is where I like to do the program from when I'm on the road because the lighting is exquisite. Now, you might wonder why I've purchased this Starbucks tea. I'll tell you why. There's a new policy here. So there's a new sheriff coming to Washington. New policy coming to Starbucks. Graphic number 1, please. As you recall, Starbucks for a time said you could come in, hang out, use the bathroom, use the Wi-Fi, just use it as your own personal free WeWork. Well, those days are coming to an end, according to the Wall Street Journal, who exclusively reports that hanging out at Starbucks is no longer going to be allowed unless you order something. Coffee chain reverses policy that's allowed open access to its cafes and a push to improve store environments. I can tell you, purchasing this giant tea for $6 has improved the environment of this place substantially. As I said, delighted to have you here. This is Two Way Tonight. If you want to be part of the conversation and you're here on the Two Way platform, please raise your electronic hand. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've seen out there and then have a couple of great guests, 3 actually, join us to talk about news of the day, including some under-noticed developments in Washington that one of our guests will walk us through. And then, as always, we'd love to take your questions and comments. If you're on YouTube or Twitter, X, you cannot ask a question, but you can certainly participate in the chat. Please, if you do, don't write junk in there. Just peace, love, and understanding. Be consistent with what we try to do here, extending the presumption of grace to all. Our interview this morning with the owner of the Los Angeles Times, Dr. Pat, as I call him, continues to bounce all over social media and the interwebs. People very interested in some of the things he said, and many of you were quite impressed with him. And yes, the answer to your question is we hope to have him back very soon to talk more. Our main topic with him was the fires. Lots still going on the ground. We're waiting at this hour for both law enforcement in Los Angeles to make a statement, as well as for the president and vice president in Washington to get another update. If either of those occur during the program, we may not bring them to you live, but we'll certainly tell you what they said. Gavin Newsom sent around another email, similar to the ones he's been sending around to his big email lists, telling people that the lies of the opposition were just that, and correcting the record somewhat. Mostly he just pointed out what he said were lies. I think there's still a lot of adjudicating to do there. Here in Washington, we are on the eve of the confirmation hearings for President Trump's nominees. Pete Hegseth is first up tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Remember, when you tune in at 9:30, you're going to get a lot of opening statements, so don't expect to hear Pete Hegseth testifying anytime soon. Those statements could go for a while. There has not been a new investigative piece that is going to derail the nomination. There's some smaller pieces that have come out today, but we're still waiting to see if the Democrats have a so-called mystery witness. We'll be watching that closely. The inaugural schedule came out. No real surprises there regarding the events from Friday through Tuesday. The one event that's distinctive, but previously announced, was the president doing basically an arena rally in Washington on Sunday night before the inauguration. Some people are wondering if the tone of that speech will differ at all from the tone of his inaugural address, which many people believe, based on Trump aides, will be relatively conciliatory and unifying. No mention expected of American carnage, but be curious to see how much he unleashes on Sunday night inside the rally. Incoming First Lady Melania Trump was on Fox doing an interview, talking a fair amount about the upcoming film that she's doing for Amazon. But she also talked about perceptions of her role. Number 3, please.
Do you feel like you're in a different space now than you were 8 years ago?
I feel I was always me the first time as well. I just feel that people didn't accept me, maybe. They didn't understand me the way maybe they do now. And I didn't have much support. Maybe some people, they see me as just a wife of the president, but I'm standing on my own 2 feet, independent. I have my own thoughts. I have my own yes and no. I don't always agree what my husband is saying or doing, and that's okay.
Are you able to tell him when you disagree?
I gave him my advice, and sometimes he listens, Sometimes he doesn't, and that's okay.
She also said in that interview that she will live full-time in the White House after Tuesday, after Monday's swearing in. So we'll see about that. President Trump is scheduled to be on Newsmax at 7 p.m. Eastern immediately after we're off the air. So that's another thing for you to look at. In other Trump news, the government of Greenland continues to have to respond to Donald Trump's desire to buy the country. Number two, please. Wall Street Journal covering the press conference today. The prime minister, whose name I will not pronounce because it has umlauts and I just don't know how to say umlauts. Quote, "We do not want to be American." Says this country plans to seek closer defense and business ties to the U.S., which of course is what many people think President Trump is angling to do, to have greater access to the air, sea, and land there, as well as the minerals there. So we'll continue to cover that, of course. In Biden news, oh, I'm sorry, one more thing I skipped over. If Pete Hegseth is the most endangered of the Trump nominees, it's probably still the case. The one who's likely to be confirmed on Inauguration Day is Marco Rubio. Number 5, please. Marco Rubio, popular not just Republican senators, but also Democratic senators, as he continues his courtesy calls to meet with his former colleagues in the Senate. Number 5, please. I forget, did he resign already? I don't remember. It might be his current colleagues, but I'll soon be his former colleagues if Dick Durbin has his way. Here is a photo and a tweet from Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, who says that he is super delighted to have Marco Rubio be the Secretary of State. I believe he is a good choice to lead the State Department. So looks like Rubio is going to be confirmed with a lot of Democratic votes, unlike others. All right, as I was saying, in Biden news, he gave his farewell foreign policy speech this afternoon at the State Department. He is expected to give his overall farewell address on Wednesday night in prime time. A lot of conservative criticism of the speech he gave today as being too a failure to cite some of the things that went wrong on his watch. And there's great disagreement amongst the left and the right about what kind of foreign policy President Joe Biden was. Certainly, there are many things that happened on his watch that he continues to not tell the truth about, but as the Biden people will say, compare it to Donald Trump. All right. Finally, the Weiss report. It's the final report of the special counsel who investigated Hunter Biden, both the gun charge case and the tax case. Apparently, that report is 280 pages, and Fox News has it. Supposed to be released later today to the world, maybe even during this program. So we'll let you know what's in there, 280 pages of more information about Hunter Biden. Finally, before
I just got it. I'll send you some stuff.
Okay, thank you. Finally, before we get to our guests, let's remind you all, coming up in a couple weeks, if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, or perhaps planning a trip to come check out the unblossomed cherry blossoms, you can join Sean, Dan, and myself live here in Washington, 5 p.m. Eastern time on February 2nd. That's Sunday night, February 2nd. There's no pro football that day. If you want to buy tickets to the event, there's VIP tickets, very special VIP package, as well as regular tickets to join us for a live version of the morning meeting. You can do that. Go to twoway.tv. That's twoway.tv. Learn more about the event and how you can buy tickets. Look forward to seeing you all there. All right. So I want to talk more about the fires and particularly about this question of whether Donald Trump's criticism of how the LA officials are doing and the California officials are doing is warranted or a good idea, whatever it is. So let's start bringing in two of our guests. Would be Rob Stutzman, who is an expert on California, I believe still a resident of California, if I'm not mistaken. Rob will confirm that for us. And along with Rob Stutzman is Kristen Davis. Both are Republican strategists, and we couldn't be more delighted to have them both with us. So, Kristen, welcome in. Thank you for joining. First of all, do you know where Rob Stutzman lives? Any idea? You know Rob? Did you know each other? You don't know each other. Well, Rob, you should know. We're going to do some 6 degrees of separation. Rob, how well do you know Karl Rove, who Kristen used to work with? You know Carl
Fairly
pretty
well.
Pretty
Yeah.
well. All right. So there you got Carl in common.
There we go. 7 degrees.
I knew it would only take
Play that game.
usually if you go to Carl or like Reince Priebus, you're gonna hit pay dirt. Rob, do you still live in California?
I do. I'm still in California. I'm in Sacramento.
Sacramento. So you're not that far from where Gavin Newsom works, but far away from where he's spending his time. How would you,
Exactly.
if you were could you make a positive case for how Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass are handling this, or is that an impossible thing for you to do?
No, it's not impossible. The state emergency response mechanisms, CAL FIRE specifically, are very good because we have a lot of these types of events. We'll give the governor credit for something. They pre-positioned a lot of assets into Southern California because they knew the forecast for these high winds, these Santa Ana wind event, was going to happen. So I think that's something he should get credit for. It also, though, is the damning evidence for Mayor Bass, because this certainly wasn't an unforeseen possibility to have this type of disaster. Everyone was planning for the possibility.
Rob, if you were lecturing at a political science course, George Washington University or someplace that has such things, what would you say is the number one lesson for a public official out of this disaster?
You have one job, which is to be present and lead when your city or state or nation may need it. And you cannot abandon post. That's always job one. And it leaves an indelible mark that's really hard to recover from, I think.
Kristen, do you look at what's happening now as something that's fair game for Donald Trump and other Republicans to criticize, or should people just be focused more on being supportive of the people of Los Angeles?
Well, I think you could do both. So, you obviously, there are a ton of organizations that are helping pull together resources to help the families in California that have been affected. And I think it's absolutely the first move is to go and promote those organizations. But it's absolutely fair game to then critique what the leaders in California are doing. It didn't stop Democrats from doing it during the hurricanes in Florida. I think Governor DeSantis the other night when he spoke up and defended Trump, when that same question was asked, was spot on. I mean, there really is a double standard where have these Republican states and Republican governors handling things. Democrats criticize them, nothing really happens, and now you have a Democrat state. And I wouldn't even say that the criticisms have been unfair or too much. Just basically stating the facts, and you had some Democrats kind of balk and say it was too far. But I think it's absolutely fair game. There is a balance to obviously remember that we're talking about human tragedy here and lives have been affected. And so you can't lose that. And I don't think anyone necessarily has. I think both the President Trump and Republicans as well as Democrats have been highlighting that part. But, from the outside looking in, it appears that Newsom and Bass and leaders in California have shown us exactly what not to do, particularly when you see other governors across the country, like Governor DeSantis, Governor Abbott, these other, Republican governors who have dealt with natural disasters in a very efficient manner. It just is night and day in how the different leaders handle these situations.
You both know that there is no Republican Party in California. I mean, no disrespect to people who currently staff the operation, but Kristen's too young. But Rob and I know that Pete Wilson was governor of California. I don't catch Schwarzenegger because I was unorthodox. But if you two were sitting in Republican Party headquarters and you were co-executive directors of the California Republican Party, just go ahead and talk amongst yourselves as you would to say, what could the California Republican Party be doing now to use this as an opportunity? It's not exploiting it for political gain. It's saying, hey, look, the voters of at least part of the state say Democratic governance has let us down. You see these celebrities on Twitter saying it. So talk as if you were in a meeting. What kind of things would you be thinking about doing to try to give the voters who have disregarded the Republican option for a long time there an option? Go.
Kristen, I'll defer to you first.
Okay, sure. Again, being, if you're in the state on the front lines of this, for lack of a better term, there are a number of things that Republicans can do to be the leaders of action. So there are mayors in the state, there are local Republican officials, especially, the further south and north that you go. Pull those together and have them in the community, handing out supplies, just make them visible, because there are so many right now visuals of Newsom running away on the phone and not necessarily being as present and hands-on in the situation. Put the Republican leaders in the state in positions to show that the Republican Party is the party to jump into whatever action they can. I don't think right now is the moment to kind of, lay out, here are the 5, drastic mistakes that Newsom made. That's going to come. That time is going to come probably once the fires have stopped burning and some of the immediate tragedy has been handled. But right now, there's a lot that Republicans in the state can do to just be present and be that party that cares. I mean, one of the biggest things that voters want in their leader is to know that they care about them. Democrats aren't really doing that in California right now from the outside looking in. And so Republicans really can fill that void by putting, there are a lot of good local Republican officials in the state that can step up and, ship down to where the fires are to really be present in the community. And then that will help the case later on to say Newsom wasn't there, Democrats weren't there, we were, here's how we could be there in the future.
So I agree with all of that. And I think there's also a policy opportunity, and Republican legislators are voicing this, and this is on the heels of an election in California where Trump did outperform his previous numbers by about 6 points. Interior counties did go red that have been blue for a long time. And voters in every county approved the criminal justice measure over the objection and opposition of Governor Newsom, like 69% to 31%. So there is already a sense that things have gone a little too far in the left direction in California. And there are policy questions that I think that can be raised here. I mean, look, this fire is 90% about a wind event. However, if we're gonna acknowledge climate change in California, why don't we have infrastructure to defend us against it instead of just trying to do programs to try to inhibit it? Let's do both. So there's real policy opportunity to writ large, I think, especially around infrastructure and water infrastructure specifically, for Republicans to make some pretty substantive cases, but also I think have a very tangible political effect as well. It's a permission structure for these rich libs on the coast to say, you know what, it's gone too far. We need Republicans to fix this, just like voters in states like Massachusetts or New Jersey and other places in the Northeast will do from time to time with their governor's mansions.
Let me play devil's advocate, because I'm surprised. I think of you two, basically, never had a meal with either of you where you didn't bring brass knuckles, which is to say, I think of you both as very aggressive. I'm surprised that you're not advocating. Now's the time. Like, the California Republican Party has not done well lately. This is a time when I don't remember ever hearing such focused, on-point criticism of liberal governance in Southern California as we're seeing right now. So what's the argument against having a press conference and saying, with whoever, national Republicans maybe, to say, here are the 5 things that Republicans would do with conservative governing principles that would deal with the situation now and protect us from happening again? What's the argument against being aggressive like that?
The argument against it is they're finding human remains and that Southern California is still on fire. And by the end of tonight, there could be other parts of it that are on fire. So I still think you're in the midst of an ongoing crisis. And what you're describing, Mark, may exactly be something, but that should be done, that I probably would advocate, as long as it is clear in what they want to do. But that's probably 7 to 14 days from now, once the fires are out and we truly have exhaled because we've come out the other side of this event.
Yeah, no, I want to be clear. I think that Republicans in states should annihilate Democrats on this. This is not just going to be a one press conference type of thing. There's a whole campaign and party rebuild to come off of the failures here. But almost more important than a hit is the timing of the hit. And so to do so now, I think could backfire potentially on Republicans in the state. To Rob's point, you really have to take into account just the human life tragedy that's happening. And I think being there and being the bigger person by being a hand for the people that are suffering, ultimately, will make your punch a little bit harder when it's time to make it.
And Gavin, don't give Gavin an opportunity to accuse Republicans of politicizing. He's doing himself in. The more Californians see Gavin on the news every night, gesticulating and talking in non-sound bites, talking about the president, who's obviously running space in his head, President Trump. I don't get in the way of that at the moment. Is some of my political assessment. It's pretty damning. This happened during COVID a bit, where he was on every day doing the briefings. At some point, people don't want to see you, especially if all you're doing is complaining instead of, to Kristen's point, actually look like you're doing something productive in the midst of the crisis.
Dan Turntine, you know him from the morning meeting, but I brought him in because, Dan, I wanted to ask you about something that I thought about today, and Kristen and Rob, you guys may have a point of view on this too. I've not seen much Bass Newsom alliance. I've rarely seen them on camera together. They're both a little bit under siege, and not for exactly the same thing, but being found wanting. Dan, how do you appraise? And I don't know much about their relationship prior to the fires, but how do you appraise the two of them? Is it every man and woman for themselves here, or should they be doing more of a united thing?
Yeah, I think they should be doing more united stuff, and I wouldn't just limit it to Newsom and Bass. I mean, the delegation has not been rallying around their leaders here. You have county officials or city officials that have blamed one another for it. And I think as both guests were just saying, in a crisis, you want to look like you're in command, you're strong, you're calm, you're cool. And both of them look the complete opposite. I mean, at times they've been frozen on camera. At times they haven't wanted to answer, people who have come up to them. There's, a lot of finger pointing at, I want to know answers, and this group needs to look into it. And I think, as you were just saying, for Republicans, there's that line between appropriate criticism, but then trying to solve the problem. And I think for the Democratic Party, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, you have Nancy Pelosi kind of aging out here. She historically, ruled that delegation with an iron fist, kept very close tabs on everything happening in the state. And you just kind of feel a little bit like the party's coming apart or not coming together on this front.
All right, let's bring in Charity. Charity Jennings, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Let us unmute yourself and then tell folks where you are and what's on your mind. Stay to unmute. There you go. Nope, one more time. There you go. All good. Thank you for joining.
Hi,
What's
Mark.
on you?
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona.
Thank you for joining. What's on your mind tonight?
So we've already heard Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass talk about, the future rebuilding, recovery from this over time. There's the immediate get the fires out and get people taken care of, but then, rebuilding houses, rebuilding neighborhoods. California.
You all lose Charity or just me?
Yes.
Charity, we've lost your audio, unfortunately. I don't know if your mic came unplugged. Cannot hear you. One more time. No, I don't know what's happening. Give it a try. We'll bring you back. Give it a try. There you go. Try now.
Am I back?
You are back. Go ahead.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, just, what does it look like from a policy perspective going forward in terms of the timelines for permitting and getting permissions to actually build? Both the governor and mayor talking about the future, but that's notoriously a long and expensive process. So what does that look like from a policy perspective?
So in the olden days, I think it would have looked horrendous, but there's three things going on that I think could well cause them to go faster and to really engage in the cutting of the bluest of red tape. Number one, the example of Governor Shapiro in fixing the highway. That really resonated for a lot of Democrats. And Governor Newsom, as a competitive governor, watches very closely what other prominent governors do. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them try to follow that example. Two, because of social media, and the sort of ethos of transparency that we have now, there's nowhere to run and hide on this. And then lastly, there's a lot of really rich people who want to build faster, and they can afford lawyers, and they can afford all sorts of things, to lobbyists and everything else. So I think you're going to see it will be faster than the norm. Whether it will be fast enough or faster than would be in a different state, I don't know, but it will be faster than it would have been. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. The governor issued an executive order yesterday suspending our Environmental Quality Act, which we call CEQA in California, which is really a code word for don't build anything. So we usually only suspend it to build sports stadiums, but he is suspending it. He's also suspending additional regulations that go with the coastal zone. There's a whole commission here in California called the Coastal Commission that have jurisdiction. But that's all statutory, and he's, the executive authority under an emergency like this is pretty broad. So it won't be Florida, it won't be Texas, but I agree with Mark. It'll be about as fast as you can clear it in that blue red tape, as he said.
Kristen?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head by mentioning Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania. That really spoke, I think, broader than Pennsylvania when he was able to fix the highway that quickly. It also resonated in state. I think that's why his numbers are really started to go on the upswing as they did. And frankly, Governor Shapiro kind of looked like a Republican governor when he did that fast. And so I think, Governor Newsom, if he wants to compete in that 2028 game, which he's always mentioned, is going to need to, this is his test. And right now, I think he's failing miserably at it. He has a very, very short window to turn it around. And I don't even mean, build a new apartment building or a new house tomorrow. Just show up as a leader. We haven't seen the leadership presence from him, the, confidence to know that someone, I think Charity or someone here mentioned it, that he's in charge, that people in California, if I were a California resident right now, I would be very, very nervous that no one is managing the crisis around us, because he hasn't shown up in that fashion. And so he needs to do something to take the leadership mantle. That's the first test. And then that will, we'll see how fast everything else goes. But he's losing that window to, even if he were to build very quickly, his first, response in these first few days has been so erratic and, shaken without confidence that I think he's going to have a hard time showing success, as he builds later on.
Dan?
Yeah, I totally agree with Kristen. I mean, he's ambitious, and he's got a very narrow window here to get back on offense and try to just project strength and command, and then turn to the execution of policy. I mean, I think there is more opportunity on that front because people don't expect their house to be rebuilt in 24 hours. And I think given the kind of liberal governance is a little bit on defense kind of nationwide right now, there really is this opportunity for him. But first and foremost, he has got to look like he is in charge, and more like Haley Barbour and less like, who was it, Governor Blanco, who just looked like a deer in headlights during Katrina and never recovered.
Charity, thank you so much. How'd you find out about two-way?
It was recommended on YouTube, I think.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Come back regularly, please. Again, if you want to be in the conversation, please raise your hand. We love people who've never been in before, so please join. I want to switch topics to something. I'm in Washington, as I said, and I was having lunch with a lobbyist today, longtime observer of Washington. And he pointed out two things that John Thune has done that have not gotten a ton of attention. And I want to know what you all think of it, of this thought. One is he came out against eliminating the filibuster. And he also came out and said the party shouldn't overrule the parliamentarian if the parliamentarian rules against them, saying that was akin to getting rid of the filibuster. As you know, Donald Trump in the first term tried to get rid of the filibuster, and Senator McConnell stood strong and said no. Democrats made it a litmus test for the party to say get rid of the filibuster. So they kind of opened the door to it, if not for Fetterman or for
Sinema and
Sinema and Manchin, they would have done it. Thank you. So I'm wondering what you all think of what that says about John Thune, and do you agree with this lobbyist that it's a big deal? Kristen.
This is pretty consistent with how Senator Thune has approached his new position as the majority leader. Just go back to, before Christmas, we were talking about recess appointments, and we haven't really seen any of that happen, any of those confirmations. I think it is a testament to the institution of the Senate. Again, so much different than the U.S. House. The senators really do value their role as being an independent body to follow their rules and their procedures, and I think Thune has been true to that. So I think it's consistent with how he's approached the job. I think it's how he will approach the job. That doesn't mean it's going to be a hindrance to the Trump agenda. I think it's actually going to help it get more support across the aisle, by protecting that institutional procedure and approach to the U.S. Senate that so many of those senators really value, and many of them of whom won't be up for reelection for another 6 to 8 years. So they don't necessarily have to rush and do very dramatic procedural moves. So I think it's very consistent with how he's been and how he will be in the position.
Before Dan and Rob responds, I want to bring the lobbyist I had lunch with on and have him explain why he thinks this is such a big deal. Just happens to be my dad, Mark Halperin, who was a long time. What lobbyist in Washington, who I did have lunch with. Dad, why do you think what Thune did is such a big deal?
Because it's contrary to what Donald Trump said he wanted. It reflected that there still is within the Senate and the Republican side people who care about the institution and care about the role the institution plays in keeping our society together. What I would like to see is the Democrats responding to that in an affirmative way, and a group of Democrats come out and say now that they would never vote to end the filibuster or to change the Byrd rule, so that we can put that behind us as a beginning, first step towards trying to get more bipartisan policies out of the Senate and then ultimately out of the Congress as a whole.
Rob, I'd love you to just say what you think this says about Thune, but also, do you think he checked with Mar-a-Lago before he did that? Donald Trump, as pointed out, really wanted this, and yet I didn't hear any reaction from Trump after Thune said what he said.
I think Thune's this way because he's an institutionalist, right? So, but I believe Cornyn would have protected it as well, and Trump really didn't have an alternative to assault this kind of institutional protection in the Senate. So I agree. I agree with Morton. It's significant because of what it signals, I think, about still Senate independence. And my guess is there were conversations where they've made it clear to Trump, we're gonna protect this, and it's not worth making a public row over because there aren't votes in there for it. My guess is pick your, whether Tom Cotton or someone like that probably was also, conveying that to Mar-a-Lago about the reality of this situation. Now, what will be interesting will be, of course, if we hit some type of loggerhead in the Senate, whether it's the upcoming tax bill or something else. And of course, Trump may then resort to wanting to decide to get rid of the filibuster again.
Dan, on my father's long road from head of students for Eisenhower at Columbia University in college to working for the Open Society Institute, he's maintained his idealism. Is he crazy to think that any Democrats would come out and say, yes, we should preserve the filibuster at this point? And if so, who would they be?
Boy, I feel bad disagreeing with Mr. Halperin, but I can't see it. And I actually think that they were smart to be quiet, because I think if this became the Democrats and Thune, it would raise the backs up of MAGA and everybody else. And I think that it's noticeable that not just that it didn't get much coverage, but you didn't hear the Mike Lees and others kind of, saying this is an outrage and we have to do this, or a Josh Hawley, people who historically have been pretty comfortable, Rick Scott, kind of sticking it to the leader. They were quiet. The kind of MAGA influencer world didn't really seem to get their back up. And I think Democrats were pretty smart to be quiet. I think in terms of going forward, I don't think Democrats believe the filibuster should remain. I think if you polled the caucus, that would be where most of them would come down. and obviously Manchin and Sinema are now both gone. But it's easy to say it. It's another thing to actually pull the trigger and end it. So this will kind of remain back and forth here as long as it's a 50-50 country.
All right. Some breaking news I want to get all of you to comment on. Mentioned earlier that the special counsel's report on Hunter Biden by Mr. Weiss has been released. And the most notable thing that we've seen so far, please put up the graphic, is his criticism not of Hunter Biden, but of President Biden. And I'll read you a bit of this as soon as it comes up. I'm going to not read it from there. I'm going to read it from what I have. He says, other presidents have pardoned family members, but in doing so, none have taken the opportunity to malign the public servants at the Department of Justice based solely on false accusations. These baseless accusations have no merit, and repeating them threatens the integrity of the justice system as a whole. Dr. Halperin, what do you think of a special counsel rendering such judgments in a final report? Is that appropriate? Is it fact-based? What do you think?
I think the tradition of final reports, which is relatively new, is a fundamental mistake and goes against the basic principles of our criminal justice system. That is, the government either charges you with a crime, which it then has to prove in court, or it stays silent. And I think this is part of the dangerous process of politicizing the judicial system, and I think should be put into an end.
Yeah, I don't know. I totally agree with you. I don't understand these reports. They're just like a final shot with no counter witnesses that the accused get to read them in advance and raise objections, but they seem not to care about their objections. And it's an opportunity to just hit the pinata on the way out the door. Kristen, what do you think of the charge and to what extent, now that we're a little bit a ways from the pardon itself, what do you think this will play in how people think of Joe Biden for the foreseeable future?
Well, there was I think it was last week, Gallup released a poll showing that most Americans think that President Biden's presidency will be viewed as almost the worst in the last, 70 years. I think Nixon was the only one who was viewed less favorably. And yes, his record and the economy, and if you go through all the mistakes, the Afghanistan withdrawal and the pardon of Hunter Biden, all these things added together, the way that Biden is exiting office, I don't believe is fair to probably the younger Biden who first entered office however many years ago. I think he's really displaying a very self-centered, almost bitterness as he departs, which I think is really going to impact how Americans view him later on. Now, history is always a little bit more favorable to presidents as time goes on. However, I don't think we've seen a departing president. They're all different. The circumstances are all different. But the way that Biden is leaving, with the shot at the Justice Department, with the pardon of Hunter Biden, with saying he would have beaten Trump, there are so many things that he almost unforced errors that he's making as he departs that are really going to tarnish his legacy, at least in the immediate. Maybe when we're all long gone, people will look at it, 100 years from now a little bit differently. But at least in the foreseeable future, the way that he's departing and the manner in which he's leaving, I don't think is doing him any favors in terms of how Americans will view him or his time in office.
Rob.
Yeah, this underscores the pardon's one thing, but it underscores how terrible it was for him to blame DOJ for politicizing the prosecution. He should have just pardoned Hunter and said, "I'm a father that loves my son." So I agree with your comment about the reports, but I think this is a fair shot, and it adds to the criticism that Kristen's talking about. The problem for Biden is going to be the vanity that's on display is just breathtaking. I could have won if I'd stayed in the race. And Biden is going to be a president that I think it's fair to say, without trying to be unkind, is not going to have a lot of time after office to be a former president. We just saw the wonderful celebration of a wonderful American life this week in Jimmy Carter. Well, that largely had to do with the gentleman's citizen life after office. And Biden's not going to, he doesn't have that runway. And what people are going to remember him by is pretty much, I think, what you see now. And no, it's not going to, I don't think it ages well at all. The presidents that get more popular in retrospect, again, I just think have a little bit more of that time to be around the hoop a bit as former presidents than Biden's going to have.
Dan, I want to ask you your instinct or knowledge about Weiss, who, for the vast majority of the top of the investigation, seemed to be going out of his way to make things easy for Hunter Biden. He certainly wasn't super aggressive. He let the statute of limitations lapse. He arranged a plea deal that, had it gone through, and he wanted it to go through, would have allowed Hunter Biden to not serve any time. And then once the plea deal was ripped up by the judge, he became extraordinarily aggressive. And now in this final report, at least it pertains to Joe Biden, super aggressive. Any clue as to what happened to Mr. Weiss to go from one mode to the other just in that one moment?
I don't. I really don't know. I just think that, for Joe Biden to go out this way, I mean, I agree with everyone with everything that has just been said. And I think I go back to when he came into office. One of his big things was he wanted to restore the independence of the Justice Department. And he has defended it for, 3 and 11 twelfths, 3 years and 11 months. He defended it. He defended it from the attacks by Trump and Republicans, and to just flip on a switch in one statement and say everything was political against my son, and this was basically a witch hunt, is just, it looks ridiculous. And I agree with everything everyone has said.
Okay, stand by. David Griffiths, come on in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind.
All right. Well, I'm in Tennessee. Moved from the Chicago area about 5-6 years ago. Anyway, big thing for me. You talked about the filibuster, and that actually is something that I'm looking at myself. Kind of going, Democrats pushed on that this whole time, and it looks like the Republicans are at least taking a stance that, in my belief, yes, we need to maintain that filibuster. It definitely protects from us doing these swings back and forth that we see. And so I would hate to see that go away. And ultimately, I think one of the reasons why Democrats feel the way they do maybe is related to the fact that they're probably never going to get back to 60 senators again. At least not in the next 25 years anyway. And the Republicans, I'll say, have an outside side chance of maybe getting to that point. And so they probably have a little, they look at it as an opportunity. But that being said, I guess where I would love to, the question I'd ask the group is, 2028's coming, that's one thing. And Democrats have a shot of winning in 2028 from a presidency perspective. But when 32 comes and the redrawing of the maps for the Electoral College, it's going to change dramatically. They're talking California could lose up to 5 seats, New York 3. It's like 11, 12 seats. What does that, what kind of impact do you see, that having on, I guess, Democrats and how they have to, look at that map going, not 4 years from now, but 8 years from now?
I'll start. It's obviously in the short term, in a static way, it's very good for Republicans. It doesn't replace a full mega state, but it can replace a small state. I think what I look at is what states that, besides the 7 that were in play this time, could be legit in play next time. The states Republicans have been pushing on since really the Bush campaign in 2000, Minnesota and Virginia, after went the other way after Bush, New Mexico. These states are not truly in play, except in an extraordinary case like a very weak Joe Biden. Now, if somebody like the governor of Virginia was a Republican nominee, certainly besides Virginia, he might put Colorado in play potentially. But in just generically, you don't see states. And then the states that Democrats have tried to compete in, like Florida, which right now it's gone for a good long while. Texas, people keep talking about Texas, but you don't see that. So I'll be curious, Kristen, you first. Do you see states in play uh, besides those electoral college shifts, do you see states in play in 28 that weren't in play this time?
You know, yes and no for both sides, right? So I could see us making a real run for Minnesota. I do think Virginia and New Mexico are always going to be a little just out of reach for us right now, probably in 28. But I also think Democrats have a walk in the wilderness to do right now. They need to redefine themselves as a party and reconnect with the average American. If they're able to do that by 2028 and put up a decent nominee, then they could potentially put states like Kansas in play, which has been on the cusp of being purple and blue. Georgia could be more, dark purple. But yeah, I think that you're looking at, to your point on the House side, California and New York will lose their power. I think Florida will probably, have a stronger Republican contingency. You see Florida and Ohio and Indiana are red states. And you look just back to 2020 and it was not that way. I mean, a state like Iowa, is that always going to be red or are we going to shift more blue? So I think it really there are so many factors that I would be very foolish to stand here today and say these are the states that are going to be swing states in 2028, because there are so many factors that are going to be at play. And the top one for me is going to be, which direction does the Democrat Party go? Now, if the Democrat Party keeps going the way that the 8% of their base is pulling them, then I think we will be competing in Colorado and New York and New Jersey, and maybe we'll go for Massachusetts. We're going to have a very fun map in 2028 if that's the way the Democrat Party is going to go. But if they can get their act together, and with all due respect to my Democrat friends on here, if they can put up a good nominee and put up a good campaign, then I think we're going to look at some of the same states, but potentially could look at states like Kansas and New Mexico and Minnesota, and it'll be a totally new map. So it really just kind of depends on which direction, first where the Democrat Party goes, and then whether or not our coalition holds post-Trump. Because again, Trump is a once-in-a-generation leader, and no one, no matter how good they are, will be able to copy and paste what he's built. And so who will be able to take their own voice and their own brand and continue the working class connection that Trump so successfully has tapped into? They won't be able to just do it what he says. They will have to be able to communicate it in their own voice. And that will be so key in 28, because the person that is just going to want to copy what he says, as we saw in 2022, it doesn't work, or else we would have had a Senator Herschel Walker and Senator Oz and all those around the country. And so both parties will have, a test in 28, how our party is able to adapt and hopefully grow what Trump has built, and whether Democrats can, redefine themselves.
Dan, again, obviously the nominees will tell a lot of the tale, but as David pointed out, long-term Democrats are on the short end of the electoral college shifts. What states do you think your party can reasonably compete for in the short term?
Well, I think Kristen hit the nail on the head. I mean, part of it is which way as a party do we go? I mean, if the focus is the Obama coalition, right, and Trump or the next iteration of the Republican nominee focuses on the working class. Look, some Democrats believe that Ohio has become like Missouri and Iowa too. They've drifted away. They're older. They're whiter. That you could see Pennsylvania and potentially Wisconsin going kind of this same route, where if the coalition is kind of Latino and Black and young whites and kind of these upper class liberals, that there is more of a future in North Carolina and Georgia and Arizona. But look, we started going backwards with those groups, and so the party has to decide. Are we going to try to, win back the industrial Midwest? But as the person who asked the question said, it's not just that New York and California are going to lose seats. I think a lot of the North, Massachusetts is probably going to lose a seat, and Pennsylvania is probably going to lose a seat. I mean, it's all the things we're seeing in life that, it's good to own housing in Texas and Florida these days. And so, in 2032, just winning back the blue wall states is not sufficient, and just winning back, Nevada would not be sufficient. So we as a party have to decide, where are we going to try to play? And if the answer is the Sun Belt, then I think, you are looking at Georgia and North Carolina. Texas is a state. I mean, I know it's been talked about forever, but if you're going to try to go through Arizona and Nevada, another state I'd watch is Utah that doesn't seem to love Trump. They just elected a senator that, was pretty broke with Trump in a few places. So I think the party first has to decide what is that coalition of the future look like and what groups are we going to try to target.
Rob Stutzman, which will happen first? A Democrat wins Iowa or a Republican wins California in the presidency?
Until this week, I might have said the Democrat in Iowa, but I would still go Democrat in Iowa, I think. The other thing I would add, I agree with everything that was said, is Texas, though, is interesting to me for the Democrats longer term, maybe not by 28, but you're talking about this allocation of electoral votes happening in 32, as the guest pointed out. I'll be curious where Texas really goes over that that's more than a half decade away. Population growth isn't all going to be red country people seeking relief from blue states. So that'd be the one where I think of those states that are going to gain, like Illinois is another one that's going to lose, right? So of the states that are going to gain substantial electoral votes, I still think Texas would be the interesting thing to watch.
Okay. Dean, come on in. Tell folks where you are, what's on your mind after you unmute.
I should be unmuted.
Yes, sir, you are.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. First, Mr. Halperin, you look pretty darn good to have a 60-year-old son.
Thank you.
Amen.
I'm from Ohio. I guess I'm one of those older, wider folks from Ohio. Go Bucks. We hope to have a good showing in a couple of weeks. I'm fascinated by this. This has just been such a learning experience, this platform for me. And to Rob and Kristen, I'm in the last election, as I recall, from I think reporting here and other places, the ad that was most successful for President-elect Trump was the issue, she's for they, them, and I'm fighting for you. This seems to be and I would even say that's a fringe issue, really not affecting many people. I guess first to Rob, and I'm very interested for Kristen, because Kristen said Rob's party is looking to redefine and reconnect. Well, I lean to the right, so Kristen, I'm looking to stay connected and keep everything in place. How do you folks work on dealing with the fringe issues or the fringe of your parties to ensure that you stay in the mainstream and can win elections long term? Because obviously you're looking at things long term. I'm interested in that.
Well, it's a constant battle. To be clear, I'm a Republican. I'm just not a Trump Republican. I know I have never voted for the president-elect. So.
I got you. Okay. Yeah.
Well, no, don't be sorry. It's we look. This has been in California. This has been one of the reasons Republicans have led themselves into some obsolescence, although they've made gains in the last election, is because they were too defined by fringe issues, and we're not offering solutions. They didn't have their eye on the ball, so to speak, which is what I think the proxy of the transgender ad during the presidential campaign was about. It's not an issue that affects most people's lives, but it indicated that this was what was important to the agenda of the Democrat nominee, were issues like this. And those aren't issues that have anything to do with fixing the life of most American voters. So that was the power of that ad, I think, and that issue. So both parties, the incentive structure right now for the Democrats is obviously to abandon a lot of that. We'll see if they're able to do that and still navigate the coalition politics of their primaries. But I think this will be a real challenge to Republicans to keep their eye on the ball. And what's clear to me is that Trump has his eye on that ball. He more or less became pro-choice during this election. So I think he has good instincts on a lot of these issues and knows when to pull back from the brink when it's becoming too fringy. And then, he's strong enough in his base that any clamoring from the base isn't going to matter. We'll see this play out when he doesn't deport every illegal in the country.
Well, and everyone, we call them fringe issues, but they can fit into a broader topic, right? So if you look at, we'll just use Virginia in 21, we talked about schools a lot. Well, in Loudoun County, it was boys and girls bathrooms and inappropriate reading material. In, Southwest, South Side Virginia, it was critical race theory. In Richmond, it was school choice. And so there are different degrees of these issues that, you saw it even with this one issue, this transgender issue, there was that ad about pronouns, but then there was a whole other campaign that talked about men and girls sports. That's a totally different group of people. Same general topic, but a totally different group of people. So it just takes a lot of work to know who you're talking to and where they fall on that spectrum of that issue to make sure that you relate to them. And again, to Rob's point, I agree to not take your eye off the ball, because at the end of the day, even if your biggest issue is a quote unquote fringe issue, you still don't want to pay, $9 for eggs, and you still want to be able to send your kids to a good school. So there are issues that bring us together. We call them kitchen table, issues. And as long as you're succeeding on those, then you can kind of find where your voters fall on the spectrum of all these other issues.
Thank you.
Dean, thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. Please come back often. Hey, Dad, which party do you think is better on classic civil liberties issues now?
I'm sorry, who's that, Rick?
That's to you.
I think it's hard to say. I think there's always been bipartisan support for it. And so unfortunately, it's gone away with all the other bipartisan issues that have gone away. I still want to believe that my old party still has a lot of people in it who care about civil liberties. Certainly the Democratic Party did. Joe Biden did when he was the head of the Judiciary Committee, and forged bipartisan compromises on critical issues. So I think the base is still there for it. We just need people who decide that it's important enough to bring it into the forum.
Steve, welcome in. Thanks for joining. Tell us what's on your mind, where you are. Oh, sorry, Steve. I thought I muted you. Go ahead. Steve, for some reason we can't hear you. No. All right, Steve, we'll try again next time. Unfortunately, we can't hear you. No, I sent you a tweet. I'd love for you to put it up if you can real quick, because I'd like to do it before we go. So one of the things that's happened, I alluded to this earlier, which we've never seen before. And this is, to me, it's of a piece, and it's not a coincidence, with liberals who gave to universities suddenly stopping after what happened with Gaza and the Palestinians. Right, that was a watershed moment for the left, where they said, we're no longer going to fund this kind of behavior at universities. And that critique extended to a wider circle of other things that happen on campuses. We're seeing now liberal celebrities criticizing the Democratic Party because of the fires. In a way, Rob, back me up. We've never seen this, right? All right.
No.
So go ahead and put this tweet up. One of the leading liberals who's been tweeting against the Democratic Party is Justine Bateman. Now, I don't know, was she a doctrinaire liberal before all this started? This is just her latest tweet. Karen Bass, Gavin Newsom were like two players on a baseball team that don't go to practice, don't train, and hope the ball isn't hit to them in the outfield. But they sure like wearing those uniforms, hanging out in the dugout, and taking champagne showers in the locker room when we win. We, the voters, need to be the general manager of Team California and Los Angeles and get these people off the roster. Again, I don't know that she was a huge liberal, but she certainly is being outspoken now. So let me ask Rob, since you know the most about this world, is this something that could see a sea change? Donald Trump has lusted after more celebrity support. Is this something that could actually move liberal Hollywood away from the Democratic Party?
I think it could. So Justine's she's been red pilled for a little while, but it's because of California. A lot to do with homelessness and crime. How this event's happened, and she's been speaking out. If you go back to the mayor's race, where Rick Caruso, who was a former Republican, he had switched to Democrat, but he was the proxy Republican in the race against Karen Bass. The Hollywood was divided.
That's right.
Rick had a lot of celebrity support. And again, he wasn't brand Republican anymore, but he was the conservative, the more conservative candidate in that race. And so, from a local governance perspective, yes, people that lived there that were scared about crime, that were tired of homelessness, were more than happy to move towards a more conservative candidate. And they just elected a former Republican, essentially a Republican district attorney in Los Angeles County this past election, throwing out Gascon, who was a progressive. So yeah, and the industry's suffering, as we all know as well. So it is a distressing time for a lot of these Californians, these folks. And I don't know if they go all the way to Trump, but I think they would coalesce around people like Caruso or other candidates for governor and mayor that may not be traditional Democrats.
Carrie Underwood is performing at the Trump inaugural, so there's that. All right, we're at time, so we're going to stop. Thank you, everybody who participated, asked questions. Sorry we didn't get to a couple with hands up. Kristen and Rob, thank you both. Dad, thank you. Dan, thank you. Very grateful to you always for participating. Love having you here. Hope you'll come back. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time, I'll be back for the morning meeting. And reminder, because we haven't sold out quite yet, go ahead and put up the graphic. February 2nd here in Washington, D.C. Kristen, you going to come? You live in the area?
Yeah, sure. I'll be there.
My dad will be there. Good chance for you to meet my dad.
I'll be there.
There we go.
February 2nd, here in Washington. Put the graphic up, please, while I speak slowly. You can buy tickets now to see Sean, Dan, and I. And more exciting than seeing Sean, Dan, and me is to see the two-way community. Our event in New York was fantastic. People seeing each other all across the political spectrum. So this event, February 2nd, 5 p.m. Eastern time, local time here in Washington. You all can come and buy tickets now to be part of this special event at the Pearl Street Warehouse, February 2nd. More information to buy tickets, go to twoway.tv. We look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks again, everybody for watching. I'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern time with Dan, and Sean tomorrow for the morning meeting, 9 a.m. Thank you. Have a great night.